Let's get started. So, yeah, thank you. There's a few talks to choose from, so thank you for coming to this one. This talk is based on my own personal experience. And so, your experience will probably be, well, definitely be a lot different. And if I have to watch the video of this in 5 years' time, I'll probably disagree with half of it. In fact, I hope I do, because if I don't, it means I haven't learned anything. I've used quite extensively Poorly Drawn Lines comic. It's published under Creative Commons, so I'm allowed to. It's my favorite webcomic, partly because it's actually got a Kevin character in it. But also it's one of those where, it's kind of funny, but when you think about it, there is some deep metaphor and interesting things happening under the covers, so I do quite like it. And this talk is called, When Creating Software, What Really Matters. What we're going to talk about, I should probably pause so everybody can read the comic now, otherwise you're not going to be listening to me. But yeah, that one's very real. I want to talk a little bit about how I got here. It's taken me roughly 20 years in the industry to stand here. Then briefly a bit about how you got here. And then I've sort of selected 6 themes, 6 driving questions to talk about today, and then hopefully there'll be a little bit of time for some discussion afterwards. Okay? So, firstly a question. If you had to hire somebody for a leadership position in your organization, who would you choose? Would you choose somebody with no tertiary education, not really good at following instructions, hasn't had a full-time job for 10 years, was actually an electrician before they got into coding, completely unfamiliar with your tech stack? So that's one option. Another option is somebody who founded and ran a software company, built many enterprise-scale systems, coached and guided developers and teams, strong reputation in the dev community. Given that set of options, who would you choose? It's a trick question because they're both me. So I did matric back in '95, which I guess is a long time ago for some people. Doesn't feel like it for me. I then went into being an electrician. My problem in life has always, though, been if I know exactly how to do something, I don't even want to get out of bed and do it. It's not interesting to me. So I could see the writing on the wall for that one, and I decided to just do something that actually made a bit more money and become a waiter. And through a set of fortuitous circumstances, I ended up at Finsale and Pritchard, which was a programming school back in the day that taught COBOL. And you did a 6-month programming course with them, and if you passed it, then they guaranteed to get you a job, which, visa, yeah. And it seemed like a fair deal to me, so I did the 6-month course, and then I picked a company, without any disrespect, in Boksburg, that they were really, really cheap, and they allowed me to touch stuff that I should never have been allowed anywhere near with 6 months of experience. But it was a great first job for pretty much that reason. And from there, I joined an R&D company. I joined a diamond mining company into financial advisory. I decided to get rich and do a startup funded by Mark Shuttleworth. But then the iPhone came along, and I didn't get rich. So we were implementing the .NET Compact framework on top of Symbian, which was the dominant operating system at the time, until the iPhone came along, of course. So I went back to the diamond mining, and from there I got myself into consulting. And in about 2008, I started a business around software development that over time became a software services, consulting, technical coaching sort of business. We grew to about 15 full-time consultants in a back office, and it was really fun. But after about 10 years, we had a prime minister that decided the finance minister was no good, and so put a different one. And a bunch of people in the company decided, yeah, maybe not, and left, immigrated. And so things got a little bit tough doing that. And around about that time, I started speaking to a very cool South African story. A startup started in South Africa, but their customer base based in the US. They had a lot of early success with it. Well, actually, they pivoted a few times to get to that point. But basically, about 3 years ago, they were a small team of engineers, really strong engineers here in Joburg, with a customer base in the US. And they got picked up by an investment manager in the US. I think they got like $1.25 trillion funds under management or something, so some proper capital investment. And today, the company is based across in 7 time zones. They got development teams here in Johannesburg, in Hyderabad in India, there's in Peru, in Argentina, And it's over the last 3 years, it's grown probably faster than is sane. Well, definitely, actually. But that's what I'm doing now. My formal title there is Director of Engineering, and I've been there for a year now. I sort of color-coded them a bit. The red were where we typically followed a very probably waterfallish, phase-based approach to doing things. And then the greens were where we were attempting to at least iterate and try something close to what you might call agile, but often wasn't in a style of doing things. So that's me. How about you? Pause for comic. Yeah, too real, hey? So what stage are you at right now in your career? I'm sure we've got quite a wide spread here, perhaps a few people just starting out and other people that are fairly established, and I'm sure a couple that have even got a lot more experience than I do. But it's an interesting thing to think about, and I'm sure we all do it sometimes. But what's interesting to me as well is that if you look, you start out as a novice, and your first sort of target as a novice is to get to a level of competence. So you're learning your syntaxes, a couple of different languages, hopefully, and not just one, but you're learning your tool set and basically getting to a point where you can actually code something and program something. And then you get to a point of relative competence, and you can do that, but what comes after that? What's next? What's beyond mere competence? And so that's sort of what I'd like to talk about in my journey. If you're sort of around there and you're sort of curious around of what somebody thinks if they're around there, then maybe this talk will be interesting to you. But again, I do not consider myself a master at all. On most days, I'm very far from a master. I have my moments, but I'm on a journey to figuring out what mastery looks like and how to get to a point of mastery. And that's really, there's a few driving questions that I've come up with, a few things I've got into and studied, which I think might be interesting to people, and that's what I'm talking about. But if you are trying to get to a level of competence, at GemStep, the company I'm at now, we had an unconference, which is a great format, highly recommend it. You decide you're going to have a conference, you get together in the morning, and you decide what the agenda of the conference will be. And then you have those slots, and you have those conversations. It works really, really well, very lightweight format, and a lot of learning happens. But the format that the session that I suggested was, if you're speaking to somebody with a couple of years of coding experience, what advice would you give them? How do you get to competent? And really great advice out of it. It's important to know your tools. It's important to practice intentionally. Finding a mentor or mentors is fundamental to actually treating software development as a craft, learning the jargon. All of these things are really important. And if you're currently trying to get to a level of competence and your organization is not allowing you to do these things, that's a challenge. It's going to slow you down getting to a point of competence. But once you have kind of reached that point, I find that organizations tend to give you 3 main choices. Your one option is that you can move, right? You can go somewhere else. You can convince a different organization that you're perhaps worth more, or can get a different position that's more suited to you better. And that's good, especially if you've got to a point of being a journeyman. Once you've got competence, it's good to get into different organizations or different places in organization, because triangulation happens. You can get to see, oh, wow, that used to work for me, and now it stopped working. I wonder what's different. Or, wow, that actually works here. I don't understand why. Those are magic learning moments that will help you progress. So moving sometimes is a good idea. Sometimes it's not. But it's typically one that any organization will give you. Then specialization is another. And a lot of particularly large organizations, they love the specialization because they think resource efficiency is a good thing. Right? They think if I've got a resource that can resource harder, then I'm going to get more work done. And there's nothing wrong with specialization. It's good. It's good to have people around that really know what they're doing in one particular area. The trouble is if work actually flows through that person or that team of specialists, it becomes a real bottleneck in the flow of work, and it becomes hard to get anything done. And so in order to do anything valuable for your customer, you've got to flow something across 5 teams of specialists. You're going to have a hard time. So for me, a journey to mastery is actually not a journey to specialization. That can actually be a bit of a dead end if you're back at tech that doesn't have a future. A journey to mastery is more a journey of generalization, of understanding the patterns and the forms behind things, rather than becoming really good at one particular technology. And then there's management. You can tell I don't have a lot of love for that, but it's a career change, right? It's not a career progression in the way most organizations do management. So for me, if you want to change your career, you want to go into management, all power to you. But typically, if you want to go on a journey to mastery and how to create software well, going to a place where you're going to decide and other people do the work is not going to actually help you. You're going to get disconnected from the work that's being done. You're going to disconnect people from learning because you're making decisions and telling them to do, and that ends up in quite an unfortunate cycle in my experience. So, yay for mastery. But mastery of what, right? So these are 6 themes that I've just sat and thought were maybe useful. You know, I sucked them out of my thumb, so it's probably more than 6. But they're 6 interesting ones to me, and they sort of come from driving questions that I had of trying to understand the things that I was facing as I moved through my career. So the first one is around narrative. You know, how did I come to believe the things that I believe? And so earlier I showed you that slide of the stuff on the left and the stuff on the right. That was a demonstration of narrative. All of those things were true, absolutely true. But if I was interviewing for... Sorry, did I forget to pause for comment? Yeah. All of those things that I showed you were actually true, right? It was about if I want to shape a narrative, I need to select which of those things I should actually share if I'm in an interview situation. And turns out that's actually the way we interpret the world, in my view. Again, this is all me, you may have a different worldview, but basically the way I see things is that there is a reality, a physical reality that we all share. But there's so much happening. There's different talks in the different rooms. You're not going to know what's there. There's stuff happening at work today, and you're not there. And so you're not going to know actual reality. But your brain is going to trick you into thinking you do. It's going to build up this narrative that is coherent and cohesive around what is actually going on around you. And that becomes your way of understanding the world. Through myth, through metaphor, through stories, you construct this reality that explains why things happen. But everybody else is doing that too, right? And so to talk about what the reality is kind of a false thing because everybody else has got their own impressions of things. And so when you start to understand narrative and shaping narrative and how people are doing it, if you want to create great software, it's really helpful to help people to have a shared narrative because there's going to be... Yes, sorry, question?
So the 6
yes.
Mastery of those 6 items.
Yes.
Specifically for software development.
Well, you could generalize it pretty easily, I think. I came to it through software development. So I don't want to say that this is only for software development. I'm sure if you're doing business analysis or testing or anything else, and even in other fields, narrative has got little to do with software development at a broad scale, but it's fundamentally important if you're going to create software well to understand that narrative is a thing and learn how to construct it. And I'm very happy to take questions. I might not see your hand because I might not be looking at you, but jump around and I'll take any questions. If you've got anything that feels like really, really specific to your context, I will be in the that panel area afterwards to have a chat. And I'm going to share these slides afterwards. Later, I've got a few book recommendations and that sort of thing. Don't hurry to write them down. If it's something you're interested in, you can get a copy of the slides later. All right, so a couple of examples of how narrative has actually helped me in software. And this one goes right back to the days when I was working at that R&D company. We were building some check guaranteeing software. And this software was amazing. It could do absolutely everything. Like the user interface was a thing of beauty. It was just buttons and combo boxes and all over the place. And you could do literally anything with it. And it was very successful in South Africa. And then we took it to America. And they took a look at it and they said, no, you've got to reduce it down to one single button. We want to click one button and know if the check is guaranteed or not. And me, back in my experience, thought, wow, what a bunch of morons. They don't understand the power of this beautiful thing that we've wrought. And it took me many, many years to realize that actually what I was missing is that they had a particular language, a particular way of understanding their business. And if I had spent more time getting into their shoes and understanding their narrative, we could have easily created those 1 or 2 buttons in languages they understood and find that simplicity in what we're building. Because at that time, my narrative, and it's sometimes a common one that you find, is that users are dumb, we're smart. That prevented me from actually finding that. Another one was this idea of why can't they see I'm here to help. I used to do a bit of technical coaching, and I would go into teams, and I would take a look at what they were doing, and through my experience, I would know that I had some good ideas for them, and I would try and give them those ideas, and they just flat out wouldn't listen. And it was such a weird thing for me. Like, I want to be a friend, guys. I'm not here to do anything bad. But again, if you look at narrative, this is something I picked up from Esther Darby, which is really cool. It's all the different kinds of coaching you could do. And, I was coming in as a partner. That was my narrative. We'll do it together and we'll learn from each other. Let's partner. The guy who was hiring me and paying my invoice says hands-on expert. Do it for them. They're dumb. They don't know how to do it. I brought in an expert that can tell them. And so for those guys, their narrative was, our boss doesn't trust us, and he's brought in this other person who's going to fix us, but we don't think we're broken. And my lack of understanding that narrative and how I was entering that system meant I was not going to be successful even before I stepped in there, no matter what I did, unless I was able to shift and shape that narrative in a way that allowed us to create great software together. Another one was a moment for me. I was at a conference on DevOps, and there was a CIO speaking. Now, once you start to get that sort of level, you're often spending a lot of time shaping narrative. And they said, we started our DevOps journey 5 months ago, and we're basically done. We've got cross-functional teams. We've got all of our deployments done. Everybody's doing TDD. It's wonderful. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm out of a job, because that's what I've been trying to teach people. I sure as hell can't teach it across an environment in 5 months. I need to understand how they did that so I can learn how, but also I need to do something else because they've cracked this. And then a few sentences later, he said, and in a month's time, we're buying an automated tool, and we're going to automate all the TDD, and we won't have to do it anymore. And then I realized that the label, the word TDD, was his meaning, his definition for that was something fundamentally different to what mine was. And that's something I've had to learn again and again in my career, is that I tell people a particular word that has deep meaning for me, or they tell me a word, and we assume because we're using the same word that we have the same understanding. But that ends up biting you because your narratives and your understanding of reality is just so fundamentally different that you don't pick up that difference until they zig and you zag, and now you hate each other because, why did you do that? And so that's where understanding and having empathy for everybody's narratives is a really powerful thing, and has helped me a lot. All right. If you're interested in this, here's some things I can recommend. Joseph Campbell has written a lot on myth. When I first heard about myth, I assumed it was something to do with sort of ancient Greece, but our organizations and our software teams are full of myth today. And if you can understand that, it's a powerful thing. George Lakoff, Metaphors We Live By, understanding how we use metaphors and how we think through metaphors. And then Gregory Bateson has done some great work around how we make meaning, how we shape language, and language shapes us, and some very powerful stuff if you read through those. I sprinkled a few pro tips through. First one, I learned from the people, not the label. That was a powerful switch for me. Previously, before this, if I wanted to learn a particular field of study, I would Google it, I would find a few articles, and I would read those articles, and then I would assume I'd know the thing. What I found is way more powerful is, let's use the TDD example from earlier. If you really want to understand TDD, don't Google for TDD. Figure out who actually came up with the acronym. Who was that person or persons? And go back and find out why did they call it that? What were they thinking? What were they trying to do at the time? And if you study that person's work, you'll get more of the original thinking. And from there, and studying that person, you might find that they actually did some other interesting stuff as well. And then you can jump around, or you can say, well, how did they learn that? Maybe they had a mentor that taught them a bunch of stuff. Yes?
Isn't there a problem with that when you get ideas like, recently I was trying to understand monad?
Yes. Oh, good luck. You picked the wrong thing.
If you want to understand that,
yes.
you have to read really widely until you get that, that's what the original said.
Yes. So I think the same still holds true, is trying to find those seminal works and the real base theory of monads, instead of trying to learn it maybe through a language implementation of it. It's the pattern is getting to that base, original, fundamental thinking and learning that, instead of learning all the derivative stuff that came afterwards. If you really want to understand it, it might be the way to go. But you never will, so give up. Monads. No. It's not going to happen. At least it hasn't for me yet. But there's a few guys down here who understand them well, so go chat to them. They'll give a cool explanation. Another one is my memory is actually pretty terrible. I don't have a good memory, but I do read a lot, which seems to be contradictory. But why I read is to actually try and improve my compiler, to improve the way I see the world, to improve the way I respond to the world. And that I do find I get from books. I typically don't find a book and read it end to end. I find a book that I think will be interesting and I make friends with it. I feel the paper, I read the index, maybe I read the first chapter, I get to know the book, and then I put it on my bookshelf and leave it there and basically forget about it. And then I'll be at work and I'll come across a particular thing that I don't understand, and suddenly my brain will say, hey, chapter 3, the yellow book, top shelf, now's a good time to read that. Pull it out, and now I can actually learn in context. And that seems to be a much better approach for me and my learning. So I mentioned earlier this idea that there is one fundamental reality in the way I kind of model things. But how do you actually know the difference between what it is that you believe and what's reality? Philip K. Dick's got a wonderful quote, is reality is that which does not go away when one stops believing in it. And yeah, sorry, pause for comic. I think that's about Twitter. So, yes, some stories about reality. I'm a big fan of retrospectives. I find them very powerful. But I was working at a particular bank, and I've abstracted the names to protect the innocent. So I was working at a bank trying to get a team to do effective retrospectives and talk to each other. And every time we had a retrospective, butter wouldn't melt in their mouth. It was just, everything was wonderful. Which was really troubling for me because I was observing the team during the week and they had knives out and they just really weren't a healthy team. And trying to understand that and dig into it a bit, what I found the reality was that half the team was from the bank and half was from a consultant. And one of the consultants was actually a team lead. And at that consultancy, they had a fundamental law that if you ever badmouth your team lead in front of the customer, it's a fireable offense. And so that team, because of that reality, just could never have effective retrospectives. There's nothing I could do about it that could change that, short of actually changing the structure of the team. So it's interesting how reality can shift things. Another example was, how am I doing for time? Because, how long have I still got? 15 minutes. Oh, crap. I better hurry up. Okay, we're going to skip some stuff. So some stuff, if you're interested in reality, Nassim Taleb's work is really good. Anti-Fragile is fantastic. The Systems Bible by John Gall I highly recommend. And Dave Snowden's work in Complexity. The Cynefin model is a great way of looking at reality and trying to understand how to actually respond to what you're seeing. I'm going to skip that and get to humans. Yeah. So I actually got into software development for two reasons. The one was that I really like solving problems and having things that I don't understand that I need to understand. And the second major reason that I wouldn't have to deal with people. It was not something I was interested in at the time. But as I got more experience and as I started my own business, I realized that a lot of the problems and the real meaty, interesting puzzles were actually outside the computer, not inside it. And that sort of kicked off my journey to try and, yes, right?
I lied to you. I just saw on Twitter the updated schedule, so your session is at 5. So
Okay. How much time? 26 minutes. Okay, we'll come back to that stuff if we've got time. Yeah, we'll jump back to it. I don't think it was that interesting anyway. But the point is here that I started out very much in my career of just focusing on the computer. It's pure logic. If something's wrong, it's because something in the computer is wrong and you can find it and you can fix it. And people just don't work like that, and that freaked me out. So the first story I'd like to share is how that contrasted with the before and an after of me trying to spend more time understanding people. I was working with a team at company BL, and I was brought in to help them out, and I took a look at what they're doing, and I said, oh, clearly the problem is that they don't have continuous integration. So I spent a week or so putting in Jenkins and all the cool stuff at the time and built them a beautiful CI pipeline, and I turned to the team and I said, ta-da, I've solved it. And they turned to me and said, sorry, who are you again? And I had solved what I thought was a tool problem, but the team didn't think they had a tool problem, and they didn't really know me, and it never ever got off the ground because it just wasn't matched in. And to contrast that with Team KB, who, when I first went there, they said, you know, we have this tool problem. Please will you install Team Foundation Server for us? And I took a look at what they're doing, and I said, look, guys, Team Foundation Server is cool and all that, but it's not going to solve the problems you're having. And they said, well, you know, be a good consultant and install it for us. We get the licenses for free because we're a bank. So we're going to try it. So I said, cool, no problem, I'll do that for you. But in a month's time, when you've still got all the same problems, can we have a chat? And in a month's time, I got a very sheepish phone call saying, okay, how's about a cup of coffee? And that actually led to one of the most fruitful engagements of the history of the company, was engaging with that team, which led to more work in that bank, and things went really well from there. So just to contrast those two different approaches, once I had a better understanding of humans and a better way of actually speaking to people, I was able to have a lot more success. Second example is more of an internal one. There's this idea, a thing called Strengths Finder. I don't know who's heard of it before. It's proved to be a great way of hacking my own state. So basically, they've got these 34 talent themes, and you do a quick multiple choice test, and it sorts them into the things that energize you the most down to the things that energize you the least. And my 34th out of 34 is woo, winning others over. If I have to go into a room and win others over to my point of view, I have grown the skill to do it, but I need to go lie down afterwards. I find it completely draining. It's not something I enjoy doing at all. However, in my top 5 are things like relatedness, connectedness, deliberation, learning. And so if I find myself in that state, I've got the hooks now to kind of catch it and say, hang on, why am I feeling so drained before this meeting even starts? And I reframe for myself, well, actually what I'm going in to do is to learn with them. We're going to map this out. We're going to find the connections. We're going to understand it together. And maybe we'll come out with my way of doing it, or maybe we'll all learn something new and we'll do something completely different. And suddenly I'm all ready to go.
The current thing we have going on right now is awareness. And to have that awareness, you need to be engaged.
Yeah.
How do you manage to be aware and engaged, but it doesn't just drain you completely?
Yeah.
Because the more you're aware, the more we're on our phones, the more we're connected, the easier it is for us to tire out, maybe to burn out. How do you manage to make sure that you stay in a good mental space to continue being aware?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's not something I think I've completely solved. Certainly, I'm an introvert, and so I've learned certain techniques and ways of finding quiet spaces and recharge time so that I do have more energy to engage with people. And I find as an introvert, if I'm working with people that I have a high trust relationship with, it tends to be a lot easier than if I'm going and seeing a whole bunch of strangers all the time. And so that's one of the reasons I really value having stable teams in dev organizations, is because you can work in a highly collaborative way, but you're working with people who understand you, and you can have bad days, and you can tell them, listen, I can't today, and they can respect that. And so if you're in a team that is healthy and can respect that, you can actually be a highly collaborative, highly in touch introvert and not completely burn out, in my experience. The third story only works if I tell the previous one, which I skipped. So let me tell both at the same time. Try anyway. There was a set of project managers at XYZ Bank, and they were mean. They were not nice people. I did not like them at all. But I like trying to understand systems, and I like trying to understand reality and figure out what the narrative and what's going on. And so I tried to figure it out. And what was actually happening is in this organization, they had a pool of developer resources, Java resources. They had a pool of analysts and a pool of testers. And then they had a whole project management office that would spin up projects, assign a project manager, And then if you were a Java resource, you would be resourced 30% on that project, 30% on that one, 30% on that one, and there's lots of projects, so another 30% on that one. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Yeah. And so a successful project manager in that environment was one who would break the system. It would be one who would go to a developer and say, you stop working on that work, mine is more important. I'll give you a chocolate or I'll beat you up if you don't start working on my work now. And so over time, the only project managers that were successful and were still around were the a-holes, because that's what was needed to succeed in that environment. And what's interesting around the human side is at the same time I was seeing that and experiencing, I was in a group that was studying nonviolent communication. Highly recommend it, because what it allowed me to see is that as humans, we actually all have the same base fundamental needs, but our strategies for meeting those needs vary a great deal. And often those strategies are defined by the system that you're in. And so I was able to see them as humans and see those needs that they were trying to meet and look past those strategies which were very confrontational and really damaging and try and actually get to a better place with them. If you're interested in this, I talked earlier about actually, tracing the people. Here's an interesting example. If you like retrospectives like I do, Esther Darby literally wrote the book on it, on how to have effective retrospectives. But if you look at who taught her and mentored her, you get to Jerry Weinberg, who passed away recently, but in his lifetime he wrote over 80 books on people and systems thinking and some wonderful material. Who mentored him? Virginia Satir. Virginia Satir was a family therapist. She was the first person to say, if you have a person that is having trouble and dysfunctional, you can't treat that individual. You have to treat the system that they're in as well. You have to treat the whole family as a system if you're ever going to get recovery. You can't just treat that one individual. And can you see the thread that ties back to retrospectives and teams and looking at the health of a team that comes across there? And I found that through that idea of tracing the people. Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow is around behavioral economics, great book. And probably my favorite video of all time is The Basics of Nonviolent Communication with Marshall Rosenberg. So I've seen a bunch of teams and worked in a bunch of areas over my time, and often you think there's some sort of evil bastard somewhere that must be making all of these bad decisions. And what I found every single time, I'm yet to find the psychopath. Everybody is doing the best with what they have. But what they have is incomplete siloed information that they're basing those decisions on. And those decisions end up hurting the other systems around them because of the local optimization that they're doing. So I've yet to find that evil person. Yeah, they're probably out there, but I haven't found them yet. And then on the note of humans, growing my human network has been hugely rewarding. It's something I had to learn to do because I sort of saw networking as something that salespeople do. But actually, if you can create a human network of people that you understand and understand you, and you can share into that network and they can share back to you, that's a super powerful tool on going on a journey to mastery, to have those feedback loops in your life, to test out your ideas in safe places, and to actually learn together. Systems, cartoon. So, how come these people are so smart, but what's happening is so not, right? If you've worked particularly in large organizations, you've seen this. And so studying systems has helped me a lot to get more insight. And actually, this is a particularly one that goes a lot broader than software, because often we see things as if your software development is your hammer, everything looks like a nail sort of thing. And I was on a particular program where a guy gave a really excellent explanation of systems thinking, and he used a pen, but I'm going to use a car. Right? If you ask a technical person to explain a car to you, right, think about a car and think about how you would explain it to me. The typical way of doing it is, okay, I'm going to explain this car to you. It's a red car, right? It's got 4 doors, it's got a boot, it's got an engine. Okay, well, explain the engine to me. Well, it's got pistons, it's got a cam, it's got valves. And so the way you understand something that's complex is you break it down into smaller and smaller pieces, and you understand the pieces, and once you understand all the pieces, then you must understand the whole, right? And that's the analytic style of thinking. It's what we do to understand programs and software development. We're trained in that, and it's awesome. There's nothing wrong with analytical thinking. But there is another style of thinking Because if you're looking at my red car and you pull it apart and you look at every single piece, nothing in that car is going to explain to you why in South Africa we drive on the left-hand side of the road and in America they drive on the right. That information is not in the car. And so systems thinking is about going up and saying, what is this about? What is it a part of? What are cars a part of? They're a part of transport. They're a part of autonomy. They're a part of a bunch of things. And with systems thinking, you're focusing more on the connections between things and the interactions between things than the parts. And it's really powerful to be able to switch between those modes of thinking when you're trying to understand something. And if you don't do that, you end up with this local optimization where weird things happen. So as an example, there was an infrastructure team. We'd been doing some technical coaching with some of the software teams, and we were asked to maybe we could apply some of the stuff to an infrastructure team, that there were some people that were not happy with them. And so we went in and we took a look at what was happening, and we spoke to the head of the infrastructure team, and he said, look, here's my dashboard. It's looking wonderful. We've actually reduced the time we take to respond to calls by 30% in the last 3 months, and we're going to get another 30% lower again. We're getting better and better all of the time. Looking good. And we went to speak to some of the people that were using the services of this infrastructure department, and they said, oh my God, they are terrible. I have to log 8 calls just to get my account unlocked. All right? So they were measuring the speed of calls being closed, and people were logging more and more calls, and their metrics were looking wonderful. And that's what happens when you have local optimization and you forget that there is actually a customer on the end of the line. So what we actually recommended in that environment is to switch it up a little bit. There's a level 1 support, level 2, level 3. Level 3 is the people who actually know what they're doing. Level 1, all they know is how to run scripts that they've been told to run. So get the level 3 people to move to level 1. Spend some time there. Understand the fact that these people are calling 9 times to get an account unlocked. Maybe we can add some sort of automation. We can not have that problem anymore, because nobody ever calls the call center because they want to. So getting better at call centering is a terrible idea. You want to not have that failure demand anymore. And so if you can start to see failure demand and value demand as a thing and start to eliminate it, you're going to end up with a better system. So that's a bit of out of software example. And unfortunately, in that environment, we weren't actually able to successfully advocate it. So as far as I know, they're still closing calls really quickly. Through doing some of this work, I was pairing with a fantastic software developer and generally good guy, Donnie Rue, and we were trying to understand various different systems, and the spine model emerged out of that work. The metaphor is sort of, what is the spine, the thing that's holding the system up? If you had to map the system out and sort of somehow draw it or write it and put it down, what would you put down? And we developed this technique and way of this thing called spine model. Not going to have time to explain it now, but if anybody's interested, we can get into the unpanel room later. Donnie's actually there. We're very happy to explain a little bit about how that works, and maybe that'll be useful. But if you're interested in studying systems, Kent Beck, his 3X model is a very powerful systems thinking model. But if you haven't read Extreme Programming Explained yet, you probably shouldn't be calling yourself a competent developer, in my humble opinion. It's an old book, but it's like required reading for any software developer. There's Glenda Eoyang, Human Systems Dynamics. There's some very powerful stuff there. If you're going to go that route, I recommend starting with her Containers, Differences, and Exchanges paper. And Russell Ackoff is sort of the father of systems thinking. And he did a talk which has been transcribed. It's back in the 80s, which is called From Mechanistic to Social Systems Thinking. It's a really nice primer for systems thinking, at least it was for me when I was starting out. An interesting tip, if I'm looking at a particular environment, until I actually gain some experience and insight in a particular domain, the only thing I can actually see are the practices and tools, the observable things. But it would be rather dangerous to look at an environment that works, see the practices and tools they're using, and then try and replicate it somewhere else. Because in any system, there's a whole lot more happening. There are principles behind those practices. There's a value system at play. There's the needs of the people and the system. And unless you can actually understand all of those, you're not going to successfully be able to do anything that replicates that, because the only thing you're going to see until you can really understand it are those visible practices and tools. So narrative, reality, humans, systems, knowledge. I'm a terrible timekeeper, but this thing of starting late has really thrown me. What have we got left? 10 minutes. Okay. All right, I think we'll make it. Read comic. Yeah, there's Kevin. And the driving question for me was, why do we suck at really documenting and storing and transferring knowledge? Why is it so hard? And I think it fundamentally comes down to the fact that we misunderstand what knowledge actually is. We tend to think of knowledge as a static resource, something that can be captured in a system and held and then passed around and enabled somewhere else. Whereas in the way I view it now, it's, knowledge it's process, not substance. It's something that you actually have to be doing, and it's in the act of doing that the knowledge is expressed or shared. So somebody I'm a big fan of is Ikujiro Nanaka. I was trying to learn Scrum. The new product development game is the paper that Scrum was based on. Nanaka wrote the paper, studied Nanaka, find out that he's actually written a lot on what knowledge actually is. And the 4 points that he makes is that knowledge is created by human beings. And if it's created by human beings, that means it must be subjective. You got your hand up or? No, okay. It's process relational. So you can't understand knowledge outside of the process in which it's being developed. It has an aesthetic component because before you're going to accept something as knowledge, it has to make sense in your value system and your understanding of what it actually is, or you won't actually accept it as knowledge. And it's created through practice. You can't create and transmit knowledge in a classroom situation unless you're doing some sorts of simulations in the way that he views things, and I've come to view it the same way. Yes? I do actually have his name and his book in one slide's time. It's Ikujiro Nanaka. Nanaka, yeah. Fantastic. He's got a lot of very interesting work. And so awareness of this has helped me. Of these, maybe let's talk about performance management, because I think we're starting to get it right at GemStep, and I think a lot of organizations get it fairly horribly wrong. I'm still not sure there's a good way to do performance management, but if you need to do it, what is really, really not a good idea is to measure delivery at an individual level. Because what that immediately does is it gives people a disincentive to share their knowledge. Right? And that's, I think, a place where a lot of organizations trip up. So what we try to do at GemStep is we measure delivery at a squad level. And anything that your squad delivers whilst you're a part of that squad is fundamentally you get recognition for that, because there might have been somebody at the keyboard really hacking it away at some important code, and at the same time there was somebody else in the team that was getting the new guy in and getting the new guy set up on the network. Now, who did more valuable work? And if you're only going to measure the actual delivery of the code, nobody's going to help the new guy. And how does that actually help? And so what we are experimenting with measuring is measuring delivery at a squad level, and then measuring actual observable behaviors of the people. How do other people experience working with you? Because what we want to try and measure is impact. Right? What impact are you having in the organization? And impact doesn't come from having a particular role or delivering a particular thing. It's broader than that. And so we're trying to do performance management through measuring the impact of people and allowing technical leadership to emerge without any structural concerns and roles. Because where we are right now, which is scaling really fast, we want to make change really cheap. And so any structure we put in has a cost attached to it of changing it later. And so we want knowledge to flow. We've got a lot of new people joining. The mob programming one there is interesting in that regard as well, is that a lot of new people are joining, and we're a functional programming shop, and people who are joining don't understand functional programming, and that yet they're useful on the first time they walk into a team, right? Because we do mob programming. Did we go to the mob programming session earlier? Yeah, so basically as long as one person in the mob understands Scala, then everybody does, because they're there. As long as one person understands the domain, then everybody does. And the new person might not know those things, but they have other experience that they can bring in. They can think critically. They can identify gaps. In fact, they can ask some wonderful, naive questions which cause you to shift the way you're thinking about things. And they can immediately start to absorb the knowledge in the team and share their knowledge in a way that they just wouldn't get if you said, here's a Jira, go sit in a dark corner, read a book, learn Scala, tell us when you're done. So the way you understand knowledge, I fundamentally believe that organizations spend way too much time trying to figure out how to manage the work and not nearly enough time trying to manage knowledge and the flow of knowledge. Because it turns out if you get the flow of knowledge right, a lot of the managing of the work stuff just gets way, way, way easier. Any questions on that? Cool. And if you want knowledge to flow, in my view, knowledge flows across relationships. And the deeper the relationship, the better the knowledge and the more easier the knowledge can flow. Now, this is just a map of how many relationships you have in a group of people, right? So if you are a team of 5 people, that means there's 10 relationships. And so that's 10 channels that you have to curate and manage and make sure are healthy. The standard advice for small teams is 7 plus or minus 2. So at 5, you have 10 relationships, but at 9, you have 36 relationships. So it grows really rapidly. And if you're a work group of 20 people, that's 190 relationships. How do you actively keep track and manage and make sure 190 relationships are healthy? And so I'm a strong believer in having small, cross-functional, stable teams of people that can get to know each other and can do something valuable as a team, and that allow the knowledge to grow and be shared in the team. And then if somebody wants to leave and go do something else, there's enough knowledge in the team to be able to maintain and carry on. Any questions on that? Cool. So there is Ikejiro Nanaka up at the top. The book on knowledge is Managing Flow. So it's a process theory of the knowledge-based firm. I've read the first chapter more than any other first chapter of any other book I've read, and I still don't think I understand it. But every time I do, I sit back and think, wow, okay. The Dreyfus model of skills acquisition is fantastic, and Harold Jarkey has got some great writing on personal knowledge mastery, which I would recommend looking at. And the last one is flow with 4 minutes to go. Oh, crap, okay. Comic. So flow, I left for last because it's really important, but I haven't really left enough time to tackle it well. But it's the idea that if you see work as a static thing, what you're going to miss out, and what you need to understand is that work is something that flows through an organization. Knowledge is something that flows through an organization. And so if you can understand and map and control that flow, you'll end up in a much better spot. I did add one. It's hard to do technical stories because there's so much context involved, but I threw this one in because I think I can explain it quickly. The second one of push versus pull queuing. If you're looking at the flow of actual information in a system, we had a system where interest rate swaps were being captured in one system, in Excel actually, and then they wanted to click a button in Excel and have it uploaded to a risk management system. And so it needed to go through some middleware, which meant some queues, and we were trying to map the sequence diagrams of what needed to happen if the middleware was down, and how we needed to, because we wanted to push a message to the middleware, and if it's not there, it means you've got to hold it, and how long do you hold it for, and then the middleware might be down and up in the risk management system, and there's another message that has to come back, and our system might be down, and trying to push these messages around was just leading to this real convoluted system. And then we had the bright idea, well, let's switch from a push to a pull. That means our system just needs to have a queue of, hey, all of these interest rate swaps were captured. The middleware then just, when it was up, could pull from that queue and send it to the risk management system and back again. So by switching from a push to pull, we could just delete all of that logic around which system is up or down, because when they were up, they were pulling, and when they were down, they were down. That was completely unintentional. But what I found is a fundamental pattern is that every time I've seen a push flow happening and tried to turn it to a pull, things have gotten a lot better. So I highly recommend looking at that pattern. I'm going to have to, unfortunately, skip the rest of them, but if you're interested in flow, there's good old Nanaka again, flow of knowledge, but flow of work and how work flows. Principles of Product Development from Don Reinertsen is a must-read. And then personal energy flow. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi has got some great work on personal flow, personal energy flow, which is also good. We have 2 minutes left for any discussion points. Sorry, I kind of rushed at the end there. Is there any? Yes?
A lot of points discussed here, if let's say we take this back to the office, can seem very abstract.
Yes.
What process do you go to, especially since you help teams, to find the concrete points, or breaking down from the abstract or concrete into action points we can implement, which is specific to our team and context?
You set me up for my final pro tip, and I really appreciate it. The key tip for me in all of this is figure out a way to iterate. We often see things as a one-shot, win, lose, succeed, fail kind of thing. And if you can structure your learning, your teams, the way you build your product, figure out a way to do something, reflect on what you did, find a way to improve, do it again. Stop, reflect. And if you can find that iteration in your personal learning, in your team, in your work environment, that's really the secret sauce for doing it in my mind. Cool. then thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.